I want you to picture a scenario that, well, it completely defies everything we're usually taught about human ambition.
Right, because usually ambition is all about acquiring power, right?
Exactly. I mean, we live in a world where the rule is basically, if you have the power to take it all, you take it all. But today, we're looking at human beings who reached the absolute pinnacle of their fields. They had the power to conquer their opponents, and they willfully chose to step aside.
It's just such a massive alien concept in today's cutthroat culture, like deliberately not taking the shot when the goal is wide open.
Yeah, it's wild. So I am so glad you are joining us for this deep dive today, because we are pulling from a really incredible stack of sources to figure out how this works. We've got personal memoirs. We've got the philosophical theories of a thinker named Sohail Aziz Khan, who goes by SK, and some deeply moving historical records.
And these records span across the globe, right? From the broadcasting studios of Pakistan all the way to the parliamentary halls of Sweden.
They do. And the mission for our deep dive today is to really decode this specific, highly unconventional moral framework. We are going to examine the hidden mechanics of democracy, this concept Eiko calls the methodology of curiosity, and why society right now is currently muting out.
Yeah, that muting out concept is so relevant right now, but ultimately we're looking at how the true measure of a leader is what they do when their opponent is at their absolute weakest.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because the sources suggest that the foundational lessons for this kind of restraint don't actually come from academic theory. They come from real people.
Yeah, personal observation. The author of our source material actually points out that his very first profound lesson in this inverted power dynamic came from his own father.
Right, a man named Azizur Rahman Khan. And this takes us straight into the broadcasting world of Pakistan.
And we really need to set the stage here, because Azizur Rahman Khan wasn't just a participant in this world, he was an absolute titan.
Like legendary status.
Completely. I mean, his voice was considered the gold standard across radio, television, film, live commentary, you name it.
To put his dominance into perspective, he won the Pakistan Graduate Award for Best Khan won it 3 times in radio.
Okay.
Then he won it 3 times in television.
Wow.
And then he won it 3 times in live commentary. 3 complete separate hat tricks in 3 different disciplines. Quote the introductory booklet for this award, and they described him by saying, some artists are born after centuries. Mr. Aziz Rahman Khan is one of them.
Wow. I mean, when a committee of your peers puts that in print, you aren't just at the top of the ladder, you are the ceiling, you're the whole roof.
Right. And usually that kind of institutional adulation triggers the instinct for, like, legacy preservation.
Oh, totally. When someone reaches that peak, the natural next step is to leverage that power. You negotiate a massive contract, you demand a lifetime achievement award, you just solidify your monopoly.
But he doesn't do that. Azizur Rahman Khan approaches the award committee, and instead of cementing his monopoly, he tells them to stop.
Which is just a stunning act of professional abdication.
He essentially says, you have given me immense respect, but now you need to give this award to the youth. You have to stop giving it to me so that new, younger talent can actually be encouraged to step into the spotlight.
And remember, he is at the absolute height of his abilities here. There is no decline in his performance. He's just asking to be voluntarily removed from the pedestal.
Right, he's prioritizing over his own individual glory.
But I think we really need to look at the committee's response, because it makes the whole situation so much more complex.
Oh, yeah. They refuse to let him step down.
Exactly. And their reasoning is fascinating. They basically tell him, look, your humility is commendable, but under our established criteria, as long as you are alive and active in this field, this award logically cannot be given to anyone else.
Because if they bypass him just to keep the trophy circulating, they're lowering the standard of the award itself.
Right. You're looking at a massive collision between 2 distinct forms of integrity. On one side, you have his individual ethics. He wants to nurture the next generation,
which requires him to vacate the space.
Yeah. But on the other side, you have the institutional integrity of the committee. Their mandate is to recognize the objective best.
And if they give the award to someone who is demonstrably less skilled, just because the actual best practitioner stepped aside, the award instantly loses its meaning. It becomes like a participation trophy.
Exactly. It completely creates this unresolvable stalemate. The committee won't lower the standard, and Azizur Rahman Khan just flat out refuses to take up the space.
So the result is that the award is completely suspended.
For almost 2 decades.
Yeah, 17 or 18 years. The highest honor in Pakistani broadcasting simply ceases to exist. It's only reinstated after his passing.
It's unbelievable.
When I read that, it made me think of an old-growth forest. Like if you have this massive ancient oak tree, it might be the most magnificent thing in the woods, but its canopy is so thick that it blocks all the sunlight from reaching the forest floor.
Oh, right, so the saplings down there are just starving for light.
Exactly. If that giant oak wants the forest to survive its eventual death, it can't just passively wish the saplings well. It literally has to willfully shed its leaves or allow its own branches to break just to physically let the light through.
That is a perfect analogy, and it captures the exact mechanism of the father's lesson here. The author notes that observing this stalemate taught him a fundamental truth about human achievement.
Which is what?
That anybody with enough talent, drive, and ruthlessness can climb the mountain and reach the summit. But true greatness, the kind that alters the environment around you, that's having the internal fortitude to actively make space for others once you arrive.
It totally rewrites the metrics of success. I mean, in a corporate environment today, or really any competitive field, success is treated as a zero-sum game.
Oh, 100%.
If you win the account, you fight to keep the account. You don't voluntarily say out the next pitch so the junior executive can feel what it's like to lead.
Because modern society measures wealth purely through accumulation, right, and visibility. But Aziza Rehman Khan operated on a completely different metric, which he actively passed down to his son.
Yeah, the sources highlight this specific piece of advice he gave. He taught that the greatest wealth in life and in the afterlife is leaving a legacy where people remember you kindly, where they organically raise their hands in prayer for you.
It's the pursuit of a moral legacy, which requires sacrifice, rather than a material legacy, which just requires hoarding.
But, stepping aside for a broadcasting award is a beautiful gesture. But let's be honest, the stakes are relatively confined. It's a trophy.
Right.
What happens when the prize isn't a trophy? What happens when the prize is absolute control over a nation's government?
Now we're scaling up to a completely different level.
Yeah. This brings us to Sweden, and we need to set the scene here. It is February 28, 1986. The Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme, is walking home from a cinema with his wife in central Stockholm.
Just a normal evening.
Right. It's late, it's freezing, and he has actually dismissed his bodyguards for the evening. And suddenly, a man approaches from behind, shots ring out, and the Prime Minister is assassinated on an open street.
In an instant, the entire nation is just plunged into a state of absolute paralyzing trauma.
Yeah, it was a moment that completely shattered the perceived safety of Swedish society.
And a political vacuum of that magnitude, created by such sudden violence, it immediately destabilizes the entire governmental structure. The ruling party is reeling, the public is terrified, and the geopolitical landscape is shifting by the hour.
And this is precisely the moment when human nature, at least as we traditionally understand it, dictates a very specific response from the political opposition.
Right. The playbook says you strike.
Exactly. The center cannot hold, the opponent is fundamentally incapacitated, and the path to absolute power is entirely unobstructed. If you are a rival politician, you capitalize on the chaos.
But the man positioned to do exactly that, a political leader named Ulf Adelsohn, looks at this fractured landscape, looks at his weakened opponents, and he actively, willfully decides to step away.
He refuses to take the shot.
Which completely defies the established laws of political physics. I mean, we are taught that an object in motion stays in motion, that the acquisition of power is a biological imperative. If you can take more, you take more.
But sitting right in the middle of this volatile environment, Adelsohn chooses restraint. Author of our sources asked Adelsohn years later why he didn't exploit that obvious vulnerability. Adelsohn gave an answer that just anchors this entire philosophy.
It's a brilliant quote.
He said, if your opponent is not your equal, you are not moving forward.
That single sentence fundamentally dismantles the Machiavellian approach to governance. It completely redefines the architecture of a political victory.
I have to push back on Adelsohn's logic here, though, just from a purely pragmatic standpoint. I mean, politics is essentially a blood sport for the allocation of resources, right?
Sure, it's a competition of ideas.
Yeah. And it's a competition where the winner gets to shape society. If you genuinely believe that your policies will save the economy or protect the citizens, don't you have a moral obligation to take power by any legal means necessary?
I see what you're saying.
Like if the other team's goalie trips, you don't politely wait for him to stand up. You take the shot and put points on the board for your constituents.
That is the standard tactical view, absolutely. And it is how nearly all modern political campaigns operate. You exploit the weakness. But Adelsohn is looking past the immediate legislative victory.
So what is he looking at?
He's looking at the structural health of the democracy itself. He recognized a crucial mechanical truth. An easy victory over an incapacitated opponent does not prove that your ideas are superior.
It only proves that you're opportunistic.
Precisely. Adelson understood that the actual functional power of a democracy relies on the friction of disagreement. Competition must be real, it must be rigorous, and it must be balanced.
Ah, I see. So if you crush your opposition when they are defenseless, you're actually removing the friction that forces your own party to be better.
Yes. You need that friction to refine your policies, root out your own corruption, and stay sharp. Without a strong opponent, your own political identity just stagnates.
That brings a whole new layer to you are not moving forward.
Yeah.
He doesn't just mean the country isn't moving forward. He means his own party will intellectually atrophy without a worthy rival to test them.
Exactly. He realized that the institution of democracy is infinitely more important than any single individual, and the underlying principle of a fair contest is more important than the temporary acquisition of power.
Because if your desire to rule eclipses the rules of the system itself, you might win the election.
But you end up ruling over a compromised structure. You become essentially the ruler of ruins.
The ruler of ruins.
Wow.
That connects perfectly back to the Broadcasting Award in Pakistan. The committee told Azizur Rahman Khan that if they lowered the standard just to keep the award going, the award would be ruined.
Right.
Adelson is looking at the Swedish government and realizing that if he lowers his standard of political ethics just to grab power, the democracy itself is ruined.
So by prioritizing ethical consistency over raw institutional power, Adelson established a modern standard for political authority. He demonstrated that sometimes the most profound and impactful political act is the conscious refusal to exercise power.
You have to protect your opponent's right to exist, heal, and compete.
Because the system requires their strength just as much as it requires yours.
The context of how Adelson shared this philosophy is just as important as the philosophy itself, though. Because he didn't say this in a televised debate.
Yeah.
He didn't write it in a memoir to sell copies.
No, he shared this in private.
Right, in an act of deep mentorship with a young immigrant named Sohail Aziz Khan Sak. And the kicker, Adelson was not a supporter. Aselsan actively belonged to Adelson's opposing political party.
Which is just wild. This detail shifts the narrative from a simple display of personal ethics into a masterclass on civic responsibility. Adelson is investing his time, his hard-won wisdom, into a young man who is actively working against his political interests.
It would be like the CEO of a major tech company taking a junior intern from their biggest rival out to lunch, just to teach them how to be a better, more ethical competitor. Why would anyone do that?
Because Adelson's goal wasn't just to make his own party stronger. His goal was to raise the caliber of the entire political discourse. By mentoring a young opponent, he is ensuring that the opposition of tomorrow will operate with integrity.
He's teaching this young immigrant how to differentiate between blind tribal party loyalty and true democratic principles.
Exactly. He is embedding the idea that political power is not a weapon to be wielded against enemies, but a fragile human trust that must be safeguarded.
And this mentorship had a massive ripple effect because it fundamentally shaped Essaig's entire worldview. Our sources outline Essaig's later philosophical work, which includes a pretty searing critique of how modern political science and history are taught.
Yeah, Essaig looks at the academic landscape today and argues that the current generation of experts is completely failing the youth.
How so?
Well, his critique is highly structural. He contrasts Adelson's forward-looking mentorship, which was all about building a robust ethical framework for the future, with the retroactive obsession of modern political scientists.
Oh, right. He notes that today's academia often functions more like tabloid archaeology.
That's a great way to put it. The sources specifically mention this tendency to dig up dirt on deceased leaders.
Like obsessively focusing on a past leader's drinking habits or their secularism or their personal hypocrisies.
Yes, it's a relentless focus on character assassination rather than structural analysis. And Essaig actually coined a term for this, memory mimicry.
Memory mimicry.
Yeah.
Let's dig into that. What exactly does that mean?
It describes the act of dumping negative historical data without synthesizing it into anything useful. It mimics the act of education. It looks like deep historical analysis, but mechanically, it is completely hollow.
Because the academic is simply repeating facts, usually the most cynical, detrimental facts, without providing a blueprint for how to improve upon those past failures.
Right.
So memory mimicry. Is that like a student who can write a brilliant 20-page dissertation on exactly why a historical peace treaty failed, detailing all the greed and corruption involved? But if you ask that same student to draft a framework for a successful peace treaty today, they just stare at you blankly.
That is the exact mechanism. They have mastered the anatomy of failure, but they possess zero blueprint for creation. And Esk warns that when you build an educational system entirely around memory mimicry, you produce what he calls a worthless crop.
Oof. Calling an entire generation of youth a worthless crop sounds incredibly harsh.
Yeah.
What are the actual symptoms of this?
It sounds harsh, but he's describing a sociological tragedy. If you only feed the next generation cynicism, if you only expose them to the hypocrisies, betrayals, and failures of past leaders, their intellectual growth just stunts.
They become professional critics.
Exactly. They know exactly how to deconstruct a system, how to find the flaw in any argument, and how to tear down an institution. But they are entirely paralyzed when it comes to building something new. They lack the structural optimism required for true leadership.
So if a paper degree that focuses on historical flaws is just memory mimicry, what does S.A. offer as the antidote? Like, how do we actually educate a generation to build rather than just critique?
S.A. posits that true knowledge isn't something you passively receive from a cynical textbook. It is an active internal process. He calls it the methodology of curiosity.
The methodology of curiosity. Let's break down the mechanics of that, because the sources mention that S.A. believes in something called cosmic data. He argues this data is already in our DNA, which, I mean, that sounds almost mystical. Are we talking about evolutionary psychology here?
It's less mystical and more about the inherited cognitive architecture of the human mind. SX suggests that the fundamental frameworks for recognizing fairness, balance, sequence, and cause and effect, those are innate.
Oh, so we are born with a deep, intuitive capacity for common sense and structural logic.
Yes, this is the cosmic data. It's the hardware.
Okay, so if the hardware is already there, the methodology of curiosity must be the software that must runs on it.
Exactly. We live in a world that just bombards us with scattered, chaotic, often deeply negative data points. Curiosity is the catalyst that forces a young mind to connect those points logically.
Instead of just memorizing what went wrong, which is the memory mimicry part, curiosity demands to know why it went wrong.
And how the incentives could be changed to produce a different outcome next time. By asking structural questions, youth synchronize this scattered data, unlocking their own innate intelligence and breaking free from passive cynicism.
So curiosity demands a sequence of logic, while cynicism just demands a dead end.
Perfectly said.
And that word sequence is a massive anchor point in our sources today. SAK uses this brilliant metaphor to explain how society either progresses or stagnates based entirely on this concept of sequence. He uses the metaphor of the optimist and the pessimist.
It is a profoundly simple metaphor, but it unpacks the entire structural reality of human evolution. The metaphor states, the optimist invents the airplane. The pessimist invents the parachute.
Oh, I love this. Let's pull that apart. The optimist airplane is the creative leap. It is ambition, vision, and that raw human drive to defy gravity.
It's the politician who wants to reform healthcare or the engineer who wants to build a new energy grid. It is pure forward momentum.
But forward momentum in a vacuum is incredibly dangerous. I mean, gravity always... Well, Zaidie's refusal was rooted in a strict defense of institutional integrity.
Okay. Unpack that a bit.
He argued that the award existed to recognize the absolute best broadcaster in the nation, period.
Right. The objective best.
Exactly. If Khan was still actively broadcasting and was still demonstrably the best, giving the award to someone objectively less skilled would fundamentally destroy the prestige of the honor.
Oh, I see the friction here.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma.
If they give it to the second best guy just because Khan is being nice, it essentially becomes a participation trophy.
Exactly. It is a classic sociological clash between individual ethics and institutional integrity.
So individual ethics in this scenario dictated creating space for others.
But institutional integrity dictates protecting merit.
Right.
If the General Secretary lowered the standard of the award just to accommodate Khan's personal humility, meritocracy within that institution would essentially die.
The award would no longer mean best broadcaster.
It would mean best broadcaster besides Khan.
That's a fascinating stalemate. So you have an unstoppable force of personal humility slamming into an immovable object of institutional standards. Who blinked?
Neither of them. Literally neither. The result was a total systemic stalemate. The committee refused to give the award to anyone lesser, and Khan refused to accept it.
So what happened?
The sources revealed that this specific broadcasting award was completely suspended for roughly 17 to 18 years.
That is wild.
It just stopped.
For almost 2 decades, nobody got the trophy. The entire mechanism of recognition just completely froze.
Yep. It was only resumed after Aziz Rehman Khan passed away.
That feels like a massive failure on some level. Like, did Khan view his attempt to step aside as a mistake, since it essentially broke the system for everyone else?
Actually, the sources indicate he viewed it as exactly the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. We know this through the lessons Khan passed down to his son, Sohail Aziz Khan. He taught his son to draw a very hard line between a material legacy and a moral legacy.
How did he define the difference between those two?
Well, a material legacy is just the hoarding of trophies.
The physical stuff?
Right. The physical proof of dominance. The plaques on the wall, the titles, the wealth. It is taking the 10th award just to prove that you can.
Okay. And a moral legacy?
A moral legacy, according to Khan, is leaving behind a character that makes people raise their hands in prayer for you after you're gone.
Wow.
True success wasn't about the hardware, you know. It was about knowing when you possess the power to take it all and actively choosing to yield.
So the 18-year suspension of the award wasn't a failure to him?
Not at all. It was a testament to the fact that he refused to compromise his moral legacy for a material one.
He had the power to take the shot, and he held the ball.
He just held it. Wins eventually.
And that is exactly where the pessimist comes in. The pessimist looks at the beautiful airplane and immediately asks, what happens when the engine fails at 10,000 feet?
Right. So the parachute represents the sequence. It is the step-by-step structural integrity, the safety protocols, the cautious arrangement of reality that actually makes the creative leap survivable.
So true progress requires an intense, constant tension between the two. If you only have the airplane, you eventually crash.
But if you only have the parachute, you are just standing on the ground wearing a heavy backpack, entirely weighed down by the fear of falling.
You need the thrill of the flight, but you absolutely require the sequence of the parachute for a safe landing.
And this brings Essake's critique of modern education right back into sharp focus. He argues that by relying on memory mimicry, we are entirely focused on breaking the sequence.
We spend all of our time handing our youth parachutes of past mistakes.
Yes. We sew these incredibly dense, heavy parachutes made of historical grievances, systemic flaws, and political betrayals.
But we never show them how to build the airplane. We paralyze them with the fear of a crash before they even get to the runway. If you divorce the cautionary tale from the aspirational drive, the youth will never take the leap.
And the societal result of that paralysis is what the sources refer to as muting out.
Muting out?
Let's explore the mechanics of that. What does a society look like when it mutes out?
It looks like stagnation masquerading as gridlock. When knowledge is presented without its proper sequence, without that continuous thread that connects past failures to future possibilities, it breeds jealousy and intellectual chaos.
The society just stops innovating.
Right. No new infrastructure is built, no bold legislation is passed, because the critics immediately tear down every proposal before it can even take root. The society falls into a sullen silence. It loses its voice, its drive, and its capacity to evolve. It just mutes out.
It's like the static of a society where everyone is yelling, but nothing is moving. And that static is precisely what Ulf Adelson was trying to prevent when he sat down with the young Essek.
Yes, exactly.
He saw a brilliant immigrant youth who could have easily been absorbed into that cynical, muted crop. Instead, Adelson gave him the sequence. He validated his political ambition, the airplane, but equipped him with the democratic restraint and ethical framework the parachute needed to survive the flight.
Which serves as the perfect bridge to how these lofty philosophical concepts operate in the messy, hyper-contentious reality of modern politics. Because Adelson didn't just write these theories down and file them away.
No, the author of our sources eventually faced a massive real-world test of Adelson's democratic ethics, specifically regarding the European Parliament and the deeply complex issue of identity politics and immigration.
This is where the theory hits the road.
Here is the scenario presented in the sources. The author had a legitimate, highly viable path to enter the Swedish Parliament. He had the community support, he had the political acumen. But echoing both the broadcaster Aziz Rehman Khan and the politician Ulf Adelson, he voluntarily stepped back.
He refused the power.
Right. And his reasoning was based on a profound respect for the institution of Parliament itself. He had to ask himself a clarifying question. Who am I actually going to represent?
A crucial question.
He thinks, am I going to represent a specific Pakistani demographic? Am I going to represent Muslims? Am I representing the broader immigrant community? Or am I going to Parliament to represent all of Sweden?
And the answer to that question dictates the entire structural integrity of the democracy you are participating in. The author recognized a foundational principle. Parliament, by its very definition, belongs to the entire country. It must remain a universal institution.
I want to pause here for a second and really advocate for the other side of this debate, because this is where modern politics experiences intense friction. And just as a quick note for you listening, we're just looking at the source author's perspective here. We're not endorsing a specific political side, just unpacking the text.
Absolutely. Impartial reporting of the source material.
So if you have a historically marginalized group or a minority demographic that is suffering from systemic poverty or specific societal hurdles, universal laws often overlook them because the majority writes the laws based on majority needs.
That's a valid concern.
Right. If an immigrant group is struggling, isn't going to Parliament specifically to fight for that group the only way to level the playing field? Isn't tribal representation a moral necessity when the universal system fails?
It is a highly compelling argument, and it is the exact logic that drives most identity-based political campaigns today. But we have to look at the long-term mechanical fallout of that approach, as analyzed in the text.
Okay, what's the fallout?
The author of the sources realizes that while a specific demographic might be disproportionately affected by an issue, the legislative solution cannot be tribal. The law must see the condition, not the identity.
Let's map that out with the example from the text. The sources use the example of a pension issue related to a specific health condition that was heavily impacting an immigrant community.
Yes. If a certain physical condition or occupational hazard is disproportionately harming the pensions of a specific immigrant group, it is absolutely valid to bring that issue to Parliament.
Okay.
However, the law to fix it cannot be drafted as special pension relief for immigrants. It must be drafted to address the physical condition itself.
Ah. Because if a native Swedish citizen or someone from an entirely distant background develops that exact same health condition, they must possess the exact same right to that pension relief.
Exactly. If you write the law based on identity, you are creating exclusive state privileges. If you write the law based on the human condition, you are creating universal rights.
And that distinction is the firewall that protects a democracy from descending to tribal warfare. True law must remain impartial. It has to be blind to ethnicity, religion, or background.
But we know that is not how political campaigns are usually run on the ground.
Oh, not at all. The sources outline a very dangerous dynamic where local community leaders basically sell fake promises. They go to their specific ethnic or religious groups and run campaigns based entirely on identity.
They say, vote for me, send me to the Capitol, and I will secure special rights, exclusive funding, and unique privileges just for our tribe.
And the tragedy, as analyzed in the text, is that these politicians fundamentally understand how Parliament works. They know they cannot legally deliver on these promises.
Right. They know they cannot secure exclusive state rights for a single ethnic group in a universal democracy. But they make the promise anyway to secure the immediate emotional votes of their community. It is a deeply finical manipulation of the system.
And the fallout of that manipulation doesn't end on Election Day.
Yeah.
The damage cascades through the entire society.
The fallout is catastrophic, primarily for the very people the politician claimed they were going to protect. By explicitly framing their campaigns around ethnic representation and the acquisition of exclusive tribal power, these politicians pour gasoline directly onto existing right-wing fears in Europe.
We are talking about the pervasive fear that immigrants aren't entering the country to integrate into the existing society, but rather to take over political power, impose their own cultural systems, and eventually erase the local identity.
Exactly. Now, the sources clearly acknowledge that these fears are frequently based on gross exaggeration, cultural misunderstanding, and deliberate political propaganda.
Right.
However, and this is the critical mechanical point the author makes, when an immigrant leader runs a campaign explicitly promising to secure tribal power and alter the system for their specific group, they provide undeniable validation to that propaganda.
It creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. The opposing reactionary forces don't even need to rely on rumors or xenophobic theories anymore.
No, they can simply point to the community leader's own campaign speeches and say, look, we told you so. They are admitting it out loud on a microphone. They have no interest in being part of the broader Swedish society. They only want to extract power and resources for their own tribe.
It just hands the opposition irrefutable ammunition. The politician who made those tribal promises might successfully win their seat. They might get the power and the title they wanted.
But the ultimate price for their ambition is paid by the future generations of immigrants.
Because the ambient temperature of the entire society goes up. Trust evaporates. Hostility increases.
He didn't exploit the tragedy for partisan gain.
Not at all. He recognized that the health of the Swedish democratic system required him to conquer his own political power in that moment.
That phrase again, conquering his own power.
He chose to provide systemic stability rather than exploiting a momentary advantage.
And this historical event connects back to our first story in a really incredible personal way.
It really does. It's a small world.
Remember Aziz Rehman Khan's son? Sohail.
Yes, Sohail Aziz Khan, the one who was taught about the moral legacy.
Exactly. So Sohail is now a young immigrant living in Sweden, and he is heavily involved in left-leaning politics.
Right.
So culturally, generationally, and politically, Sohail is the exact opposite of Ulf Adelsohn, this established titan of the Swedish political right.
They couldn't be more different on paper.
But despite that massive divide, Sohail actually gets the opportunity to meet Adelsohn.
And the power dynamic in that meeting is crucial to understand. You have a powerful, established right-leaning political leader and a young left-leaning immigrant youth.
And Sohail is very upfront in this encounter, according to the sources.
He is.
He admits directly to Adelsohn that they are a natural political mismatch.
Now, you would expect a powerful politician to just politely nod, maybe give a generic piece of advice, and move on to someone who actually votes for his party.
Yeah, a quick handshake and a photo op.
But Adelsohn doesn't dismiss him.
He doesn't. And through that mentorship, Adelsohn imparted a central lesson that completely reframes how political conflict should be understood.
It's a quote that really sticks with you.
Adelsohn told the young man, "A strong democracy needs a strong opponent."
Which feels so alien compared to how politics is treated today.
Right, entirely. Today, the ultimate goal always seems to be the total, permanent eradication of the other side.
Total destruction.
So why would a strong democracy need a strong opponent?
Because the opponent is the immune system of democracy.
Okay, I like this. Break that down.
Think about how a biological immune system functions. It needs to be constantly challenged by pathogens and irritants to stay sharp, to adapt, and to actually protect the host body.
Right.
If you place a human in a completely sterile bubble, their immune system atrophies.
It gets lazy.
Exactly. And the first time they are exposed to the real world, a minor cold can be fatal.
So in a political context, the opposition is the pathogen keeping the ruling party healthy.
Precisely. If you do not have a strong opponent, aggressively poking holes in your policies, demanding transparent answers, and presenting viable alternatives, your governance becomes sloppy.
You become arrogant.
Innovation dies. Adelsohn understood that Palm, his great rival, was the whetstone that sharpened his own political edge.
That's a great way to put it. The whetstone.
And by mentoring Sohail, a young, left-leaning immigrant, Adelsohn was actively cultivating the next generation of that democratic immune system, even though it was ideologically opposed to him.
He was watering the competitors of his own party because he knew the overall forest needed them to survive.
Exactly. It's the exact same principle as Khan stepping aside for the younger broadcasters, just scaled up to the level of constitutional mechanics.
It is the practical application of conquering your own power. You realize that destroying your opposite is actually the most dangerous thing you can do to your own long-term viability.
It's self-sabotage, essentially. Next generation of immigrant youth has to grow up in a much more divided, suspicious, and hostile environment.
The politician got to fly their airplane, but they completely burned the parachute for everyone else who comes after them.
They broke the sequence of integration and social trust. And this brings us right back to the profound restraint of the author. He recognized that entering the parliamentary system through the door of identity politics would ultimately damage the institution of parliament, validate reactionary fears, and deeply harm the immigrant community in the long run.
He chose the sequence over his personal ambition. He chose not to be the ruler of ruins.
Which mirrors Ulf Adelsohn perfectly. And there is a final piece to the Adelsohn narrative in our sources that provides an incredible conclusion to this deep dive.
Right, because the story of his restraint has a fascinating coda.
Yeah. We discussed how Adelsohn took the young Assod and taught him the mechanics of democratic restraint and ethical power.
Yes, a profound act of invisible leadership.
But the key word there is invisible. Adelsohn, he didn't leak it to the press. He didn't include it in a campaign ad to demonstrate how bipartisan, tolerant, and magnanimous he was.
He completely, intentionally hid his own greatness.
This incredible act of political grace remained entirely hidden from the public record. It only came to light because Esse eventually told the story.
So the restraint is layered. He demonstrated restraint by not exploiting a political tragedy to take power, and then he demonstrated a secondary restraint by refusing to extract public relations credit for his initial restraint.
But this raises a fascinating ethical question for us as a society. If a truly great person makes a conscious choice to hide their greatness out of intense humility, should we respect that choice?
It's a tough question. Should we honor their desire to remain anonymous and just let the act fade into history?
The author wrestles with this very dilemma, and the conclusion drawn from the sources is a resounding no. In fact, the analysis provided in the text uses a brilliant framework, applying a principle of physics, Newton's third law of motion, to the study of history.
Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. How does that apply to historical humility?
Well, if Adelson hid his greatness with an intense gravitational humility, humanity does not have the right to passively accept that silence. Humanity has a historical obligation, a duty, to amplify his name with an equal and opposite intensity.
That is a profound reframing. Silence about true greatness isn't a sign of respect. It's an injustice to the historical record.
It deprives future generations of the moral benchmarks they desperately need to survive. I mean, think about it. If our history books only record the actions of the tyrants, the opportunists, and the loud egos because they demanded attention, we warp the entire perception of human nature.
We must forcefully elevate those who are quietly great to prove to the youth that ethical restraint actually exists.
And the sources propose a very specific, ambitious mechanism for doing this. They propose the creation of a new global benchmark, the Ulf Adelson Global Award for Democratic Trust.
Look closely at the framing of that title. It is not an award for peace like the Nobel. It is not an award for physical prowess or scientific discovery. It is an award specifically dedicated to democratic trust.
How does that fundamentally differ from the awards we already have?
The sources argue that current global awards, even the most prestigious ones, almost exclusively reward the acquisition of power, the successful implementation of an agenda, or the visible disruption of a system. The Adelson Award would establish a completely inverted standard. It would specifically reward those who conquer their own power.
Conquering your own power. It is the ultimate anti-ego award.
It would be awarded to leaders who possess the absolute capacity to crush an opponent, but willfully choose to treat them as an equal.
It would celebrate leaders who prioritize the structural health and longevity of a democratic institution over the immediate tribal victory of their own party.
Exactly. It would recognize those who actively mentor the next generation, embedding the sequence of the parachute and teaching them that true power is found in binding oneself to unyielding principles.
It celebrates the space left behind, rather than the space occupied. It honors the giant oak tree that is willing to drop its leaves so the forest can survive.
It honors the people who maintain the sequence.
We have covered immense ground today. I mean, we started in Pakistan with Aziza Rahman Khan, a broadcaster, who realized that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make on a stage is to step off it.
And we watch that same principle play out on a national scale with Ulf Adelson in Sweden, proving that a democracy is only as strong as your willingness to let your opponent survive and challenge you.
We dissected the dangers of modern academic cynicism, that memory mimicry that trains our youth to meticulously critique the brushstrokes of a forged painting without ever giving them the canvas or the courage to create their own masterpiece.
We explored the vital, precarious tension between the optimist's airplane and the pessimist's parachute.
And the devastating societal static, the muting out that occurs when we break that evolutionary sequence. And we navigated the incredibly thorny realities of identity politics, recognizing that a true parliamentary democracy must govern based on the universal human condition, not the tribal label, if it wants to avoid validating the very fears that tear a society apart.
All of which leads to the profound realization that history requires us to loudly, forcefully celebrate those who quietly restrict their own power.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to bring all of this immense political and philosophical theory right down to your daily life. Esse suggested that true knowledge, the cosmic data of fairness, sequence, and logic, might already be written in your DNA, just waiting for the methodology of curiosity to unlock it.
It is a highly empowering thought. You are not an empty vessel waiting to be filled with the cynical data of the modern world. You are an archive of structural wisdom waiting for the right questions to be asked.
So take a hard look at the sequence. of your own life right now. Look at your career trajectory, your relationships, your goals. Are you spending all your time aggressively sewing complex parachutes for fears, failures, and hypothetical crashes that haven't even happened yet?
Are you paralyzing yourself with memory mimicry, focusing only on why things won't work?
Or are you finally ready to tap into that cosmic data, build the airplane, and take the leap? What profound capability inside of you is currently muted out, just waiting for you to become intensely curious about your own potential?
It is a question that demands structural honesty. Because once you find your voice, you have to decide exactly how to use it.
And maybe, just maybe, the most powerful thing you can do with your voice once you find it is to occasionally, intentionally, remain silent so someone else has the space to speak. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take care of yourselves and keep asking the right questions. But the goal of the education matters.
The intent behind it.
Exactly. If the goal is simply to steal a student's heritage, to weaponize history against their sense of self in order to quote-unquote modernize them, you are only destroying.
You're just tearing down the building.
And you are leaving them with nothing stable to build upon. The sources argue the goal shouldn't be subtraction. It should be turning heritage into mature understanding.
So what does that mature understanding look like in practice? How do you teach that?
Well, instead of hyper-focusing on a founder's personal habits just to make a student feel defensive, a constructive education asks, how did this specific leader manage to mobilize millions of people?
What were the mechanics of it?
Right. What did the mechanics of constitutional politics actually look like in that era? What structural compromises were necessary?
So it elevates the student from being a defensive protector of a myth into a critical analyst of civic mechanics.
Exactly. And the sources introduce a concept here called identity arithmetic, which perfectly captures this shift.
Identity arithmetic. It is a vital framework for pluralistic societies.
It really is.
Because the core idea of identity arithmetic is that identity is not a zero-sum subtraction problem.
No, it's not.
If you are a young person with, say, Pakistani, Somali, Arab, or Bosnian heritage living in Sweden, becoming a fully integrated Swedish citizen doesn't mean you have to subtract your roots.
You aren't doing long division on your soul.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's an equation of addition.
It is the clear delineation between the public sphere and the private sphere. You can be fully 100% integrated into Swedish public law, adhering to all civic duties, while simultaneously maintaining 100% of your private cultural dignity and historical memory.
But how do you actually teach that synthesis in a classroom? It makes me think of an analogy.
Let's hear it.
The bad way of teaching history, just tearing down past figures, is like handing kids a parachute made out of past failures.
Okay.
You tell them, here are all the times humanity crashed and burned. Strap this on so you don't hit the ground too hard.
Right, just bracing for impact.
Exactly. But a parachute only slows your descent. What these kids actually need is an airplane. They need to understand the mechanics of creation and possibility.
And that airplane is what the source calls the pedagogy of curiosity, or teaching by design.
Teaching by design.
It requires shifting the student from passive observation to active creation.
So applied to the classroom, what does that look like?
If you want a student to truly understand conflict resolution, you don't just have them memorize the dates of a failed peace agreement.
Right, because that's just studying a wreckage.
Exactly. To give them the airplane, you mandate that the student draft a successful peace agreement themselves.
Oh, that's brilliant.
You force them to grapple with the competing interests. Or, if you are teaching about the dangers of governmental corruption, you don't just list historical scandals.
What do you do instead?
You task the student with designing a transparent public procurement system from scratch.
You are transforming them from passive historians into active civic designers.
Yes.
You are basically teaching them how to build the immune system Adelson was talking about.
You are teaching them how to wield power responsibly by forcing them to design the structural restraints on that power.
It's so practical.
And this isn't just an abstract feel-good educational theory. The sources provide hard empirical data showing that when we get this identity arithmetic right, when a society fosters genuine belonging, it doesn't just make for more polite citizens.
Yeah.
The data shows it literally saves lives.
Let's really dig into this data because this is where the philosophical concepts hit cold, hard reality.
The numbers don't lie.
They don't. We have highly specific statistics here regarding Swedish youth and global metrics. Let's start at the classroom level.
Okay.
The sources cite the Swedish health behavior in school-aged children data from 2017 and 2018. What exactly were they measuring here, and what did they find?
The researchers were looking at the psychological well-being of immigrant students, and the 2017-18 data revealed a fascinating correlation. Immigrant students reported significantly fewer psychological complaints when they were placed in school classes with higher proportions of other immigrant youth.
So simply being in a room with a higher density of peers who share a similar background reduces their mental distress.
It does.
But why is that? Are they just forming cliques and isolating themselves?
It is far deeper than mere cliques. The underlying mechanism is that a shared sense of belonging acts as a biological and psychological shield against social stigma.
A shield.
Think about it. When you are the only person in a room facing a specific type of cultural pressure or alienation, the isolation amplifies the stress response.
You bear the entire weight of being the other.
Exactly. But when that environment shifts and the pressure is shared among a higher proportion of peers who actually understand the complexities of navigating two worlds, the individual psychological burden decreases dramatically.
And this protective effect isn't just a temporary blip, right? The sources point to even more recent research that tracks this forward.
Yes, they cite multiracial youth research from 2026.
So very recent.
Very recent. And this data explicitly links a strong sense of belonging and a secure ethnic racial identity to structurally lower depressive symptoms.
Wow.
And critically, a marked reduction in suicide ideation among multiracial youth.
That is massive. We aren't just talking about kids feeling a little more comfortable raising their hands in class.
No, we're talking about literal life and death outcomes based on whether a young person feels they are allowed to exist as their full, integrated selves in a society. It proves that identity arithmetic is a vital public health imperative.
It really is.
But to truly understand the stakes, the sources also confront the darkest manifestation of this alienation, which brings us to the data on extremism and counterterrorism.
And the sources use a very raw, very real scenario to frame this. And it's something that happens in classrooms all over the Western world.
It happens every day.
Imagine being a young Muslim student. A horrific terror attack happens somewhere globally. It dominates the news cycle, the political rhetoric heats up, and the next morning, that 14-year-old kid walks into their homeroom.
Just a normal Tuesday for them.
Exactly. The teacher or a classmate brings up the attack, and instantly the entire room's gaze shifts to the Muslim student.
Staring at them.
Suddenly, a teenager is being silently demanded to answer for or distance themselves from an international atrocity they have absolutely nothing to do with.
It is an agonizing psychological burden to place on a child.
It's unfair.
Completely unfair. And it stems from a profound societal failure to distinguish between individual criminal action and civilizational identity.
Right. When a society fails at identity arithmetic, it flattens entire demographics into monoliths.
Which is why synthesizing the actual empirical data on terrorism is so crucial.
Because it shatters that flattened stereotype.
Exactly. And the data presented here completely upends the mainstream narrative.
Let's look at the numbers. The sources reference a comprehensive 2011 analysis by the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center, the NCTC.
The NCTC analysis is a foundational piece of intelligence context. They analyzed global terror incidents and found that in the cases where the religious affiliation of terrorism victims could be definitively determined, between 82 and 97% of the fatalities were Muslim.
Let's pause on that number for a second because it is staggering. 82 to 97% of the people murdered by terrorists were Muslim themselves.
Yes.
That completely flips the script.
And the sources ensure we understand this is not just historical data, you know. It is the current geopolitical reality.
They bring it right up to date.
They cite the Global Terrorism Index for 2026, looking back at the definitive data for the year 2025.
Yeah, what does that show?
In 2025, there were 5,582 deaths from terrorism globally.
Okay.
The country most heavily affected by this violence was Pakistan, and the Sahel region in Africa accounted for more than 50% of all global terrorism deaths.
So if we take those hard statistics and bring them back to that 14-year-old kid sitting in a Swedish classroom, when everyone turns to look at them after an attack, they are actually looking at someone whose broader demographic group bears the absolute heaviest brunt of extremist violence on the planet.
Exactly. Framing terrorism as a binary civilizational conflict of Muslims versus the rest of the world is empirically false.
It's just bad data.
It is, and it actively renders the largest victim population completely invisible.
So the educational and societal imperative here is to firmly establish that criminal responsibility belongs exclusively to the individual perpetrator and their specific network.
Only to them.
It does not and cannot belong to their entire ethnic, linguistic, or religious civilization.
You can't hold an entire heritage hostage for the crimes of a violent fringe.
That makes total sense. But, and I know listeners might be wondering this, if we swing the pendulum toward total acceptance and belonging, doesn't a society risk losing its structure?
It's a fair question.
Like, does recognizing this nuance mean a country just throws its hands up and accepts anything in the name of tolerance?
Not at all.
Yeah.
In fact, the sources make a very hard pivot here to explain that true, successful integration actually requires incredibly strict, crystal clear, shared rules of the game.
It needs boundaries.
Empathy and belonging do not negate the need for boundaries. They absolutely require them.
The text outlines this as the architecture of integration, and it uses a great phrase, don't leave yours, don't touch others.
I love that phrase. It is the distillation of a functional social contract.
Let's break that down. Don't leave yours means?
It means the state guarantees your absolute right to maintain your language, your faith, and your traditions in your private life.
Okay, and don't touch others.
That means you equally respect the rights of your neighbors to do the same, and crucially, you submit entirely to the shared public laws that govern the civic space.
Right, because if the public sphere isn't predictable and safe, the private sphere cannot remain free.
Exactly.
So how does that play out in the political arena? The sources draw a very sharp line between civic representation and communal bargaining.
This is a critical distinction for the health of a democracy. When an individual from a minority background is elected to parliament, they face a choice.
Okay.
If they act as a broker who only negotiates favors, resources, and protections for their specific ethnic or religious bloc, that is communal bargaining.
And what's the danger in that? I mean, if they were elected by that bloc, shouldn't they serve them?
Because communal bargaining fractures a nation into competing tribal fiefdoms.
It pits everyone against each other.
Right. It reduces national politics to a zero-sum turf war. True civic representation, on the other hand, means that the member of parliament utilizes the unique sensitivities and perspectives they've gained from their background
Yeah.
to draft laws that benefit the entirety of the nation. Their constituency is the Constitution, not just their demographic slice.